And that's what we're trying to do on Exploring the Word.
Exploring the Word, weekday afternoons at 3 Central on American Family Radio. This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. The Trump administration bringing charges against a top gang member.
It's the first case of its kind since the Trump administration designated the Venezuelan-based Tren de Aragua a terrorist organization. The Justice Department charging 24-year-old Jose Enrique Martinez Flores with drug offenses and conspiring to provide and providing material support to a designated foreign terrorist organization. Attorney General Pam Bondi calls the charges filed in a Texas federal court an inflection point for how the Justice Department will go after alleged gang members, saying, quote, TDA is not a street gang. It is a highly structured terrorist organization that put down roots in our country. In Washington, Ryan Schmelz, Fox News.
A New Mexico judge resigned last month after a gang member was arrested at his home. The man was living on property linked to the judge's family. Griff Jenkins has more.
This all began in late February. Homeland Security investigation agents raided Judge Joel Cano's New Mexico property and arrested alleged Tren de Aragua gang member Christian Ortega Lopez for being illegally in the country and in possession of a firearm. Days later, Judge Cano resigned without explanation. Now, according to court documents, Ortega Lopez had been doing odd jobs for Cano's wife before being offered lodging in the couple's casita on the back of the property following his eviction from an El Paso apartment. He associated with other TDA gang members and had tattoos associated with TDA and worried about telling the judge's wife about a specific AK-47 tattoo, a known TDA identifier.
President Trump continues to work to secure trade deals around the world, claiming that his team is in active talks with Beijing, even as Chinese officials say that's not true. Mark Meredith has more from the White House.
President Trump and his advisors say they're willing to work with China to find a new relationship, rebalancing the trade deals between the two countries. But so far, those conversations, according to the Chinese, are not taking place. The president, though, says that he believes those conversations can take place fairly often.
Mr. President, has there been any direct contact between the U.S. and China for trade at all?
Yeah, of course.
And
every day.
President Trump imposed tariffs on 145% on those Chinese exports to the U.S. And while the president and his Treasury Secretary say those numbers are going to have to come down eventually because they're not sustainable, the Wall Street Journal reports China is bracing for this to take years.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky meets with South Africa's president as the Russian invasion of Ukraine continues. Zelensky, speaking through translation in Pretoria, says peace talks are fundamentally unfair to Ukraine, but it's a risk the nation is willing to take.
We were attacked. Our territory was occupied. Tens of thousands of people were killed. Many children and adults buried alive. And the fact that Ukraine is ready to sit at a negotiations table after a complete ceasefire with a terrorist that did it all on our land, exclusively on our land, this is a great compromise.
President Trump is looking to cut another $1 billion in funding from Harvard University. Bronson Woodruff has more.
Earlier this month, the Department of Homeland Security canceled about $2.7 million in DHS grants to Harvard. Last week, the White House asked the IRS to revoke Harvard's tax-exempt status. Fox reports this was because of the university's failure to address anti-Semitism on its campus. Now President Trump's administration plans to pull another $1 billion of funding. Aaron Bandler is an investigative journalist with the Jewish Journal. He said in an interview with AFN, the Trump admin has made some demands, including that protesters not be permitted to wear masks.
They wear masks, and so it can't be identified, and that's a problem. And the administration also, among other things, demanded that the university resend its DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion program.
The Harvard Crimson reports the Trump admin sent a list of demands to Harvard on April 3rd. It says the administration sent a second list of demands on April 11th. But according to Fox, the admin claimed the second list was sent by mistake. Harvard is now suing the Trump administration,
claiming that their actions are unlawful. How exactly they're unlawful, I'm not entirely sure. But I think it's clear that the university must be feeling the impacts of it if they are resorting to legal action, and we will see how it plays out.
Bandler said this is a very important moment in academia right now. He thinks how this lawsuit goes is going to set a precedent going forward on if the federal government can hold universities accountable in this manner. I'm Bronson Woodruff.
For American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh.
Some chances come along once in a lifetime. When they do, you've got to be ready. AFA Action's Center for Judicial Renewal has such a chance to help the Trump administration make good choices, nominating men and women as Supreme Court justices and other federal judges. Your gift helps make that possible, and we'll give you a free Bible study by Stephen McDowell, God's Blueprint for Life, Liberty, and Property, as a thank you gift. Visit afaaction.net today. afaaction.net.
We inform.
Religious freedom is about people of faith being able to live out their faith, live out their convictions, no matter where they are.
We equip.
Sacred honor is the courage to speak truth, to live out your free speech.
We also rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome to At the Core with Walker Wildmon and Rick Green. I'm Rick Green, America's Constitution Coach. Thanks for joining me on this Thursday. A lot of headlines to get to and some, of course, courtroom drama. I got to tell you, folks, I'm going to try not to sound as annoyed today as I am, but I am just up to here. If you can see me, if you can't see me, I'm way past up to here with the courts telling the president how to do his job. I just, we've talked about the, little district judge guys and gals around the country. They're at the lowest level of the federal judiciary, and they think they've been elevated somehow to make national and international policy decisions, and it's absurd. It's just absurd. And so we've got to get back to a constitutional republic where the proper jurisdictional lines of not only the feds versus the states and states versus the local and that sort of thing, not only where that's understood, but where we also understand the difference between the branches at the federal level or at the state level or at the local level. There's supposed to be clearly defined boundaries so that you know what your job is. You get elected to president, you know what your job is. You get elected to Congress or you get appointed to the court, you know what your job is, and you don't go beyond that job. You don't go beyond your responsibility. One of the first things I teach in Constitution classes around the country and that we've had over 1 million people go through is the proper jurisdictional lines. In fact, one of the best lessons we've ever done, I'm sitting there with David Barton in the museum, the Wall Builders Museum, and David and I are sitting there, we're chatting about this whole jurisdiction thing. And David says to me, he says, Rick, what happens if we're neighbors and I come over to your place and I decide that your white pickup truck is just too boring. It's just too dull. I mean, you need a little pizzazz in your life. You need to spice it up a little bit. And so I just go to the hardware store, buy me a bunch of spray cans of some bright orange or bright green. I don't even remember what his comparison was. And I show up at your house, and middle of the night, I just paint your truck for you. Because I think it needs to be a brighter color. And you wake up the next morning, walk out to your truck, and there it is, totally different color, lousy spray paint job. And would you thank me for that? Would you come knocking on my door, bringing me breakfast or whatever it might be, and say, "Hey, David, thanks for for the beautiful paint job and deciding for me what the color of my truck would be"? Of course you wouldn't. You'd be like, "Hey, that's not your jurisdiction. That's not your truck. You have no say in what the color of my truck's going to be." Well, jurisdictional lines for us as neighbors are no different than jurisdictional lines for authority in decision-making for government, for our personal lives, for our church. I think one of the coolest things David Barton lays out in our biblical citizenship class, he talks about the spheres and how there's a little bit of crossover, but for the most part, you make individual decisions about your health, about your family, about the upbringing of your children, and the government is not supposed to tell you what to do there. That's why in the Constitution of the United States there is nothing about health care. There should be no CDC. There should be no FDA. There should be certainly no Department of Education or any of these other entities that have gotten into the parenting business and trying to tell parents how to raise their children. And he lays out in that video these spheres so that you answer the question, who decides, to every question of, okay, whether it's who decides, whether or not your child's going to have a experimental vaccine, who decides where your kid goes to school, what kind of education they're going to get, who decides which job you want to take. Should that be you or the government? Who decides how much you're willing to work for, right? Think about this one for a second. Who should make the decision about what your paycheck ought to be? Or if you're the employer, what your paycheck to your employee ought to be? Well, right now, unfortunately, instead of that just being a meeting of the minds between you and the employer or you and your employee, now it's government's all over that, man. Government's all up in your grill, telling you what the minimum is you can make, sometimes the maximum you can make, taking a big chunk of it, micromanaging the relationship so that when you get crossways with your employer or your employee, now you got to go to the Department of Labor or go to your state workforce commission, and then it gets drawn out. It costs everybody money, and now you got to employ all these bureaucrats to be making decisions about whether or not something was a fireable offense or whatever. You see where I'm going with all this? I know I'm going down the rabbit hole here, but it's like it doesn't make sense for someone else to make decisions about your life, whether it's the color of your truck or how much you're willing to work for or any of these other things. Those are jurisdictional lines. Okay, same thing when it comes to government. We have to also say, my buddy Ken Ivory says it this way, if government, which government? So if it is a government decision, and I would say absolutely, it is a government decision whether or not to deport someone. That is a jurisdictional, that is within the jurisdictional lines of government making that decision. In other words, you and I should not get to individually go door to door and deport people. That's a proper government role. Now, we are the government, and we should be involved in the decision-making of what are the terms, like what types of things should you deport for, or what types of things should we allow people to immigrate for? What would asylum actually cover? I mean, those are all policy questions that we should get to weigh in on, get to talk to our congressman about it, or our state legislator. But at the end of the day, once that policy's in place, it is not we do not bear the sword. Government bears the sword. And the Bible even says that, right? Government doesn't bear the sword in vain. It has it for a reason. And so if government is the one to decide, while we're on it, let's just stick with the deportations. If government is to decide whether or not to get someone out of our country because they're a danger, then which government? So should it be the local county sheriff? Well, I would actually argue that the sheriff should have some say in that. Maybe not final say, but certainly some say. Should it be your state, Department of Public Safety or in my case in Texas, the Texas Rangers? Well, I think they should have a voice in that. I think they should be involved. But at the end of the day, the Constitution of the United States gives immigration policy to Congress. So Congress sets the policy as to what is going to be allowed to be done or not done, but then who executes the law? Is it the district judge? Is it the Supreme Court of the United States? No. Who faithfully executes the law? Got my handy-dandy pocket principles here. Let me just flip over here to Article 2. And let's see. Yeah. Oh, it is. It's the President of the United States that is supposed to faithfully execute the laws. Okay. So if the president has the authority, the jurisdiction, gets to paint the truck the color they want, in other words, that's within their sphere and their jurisdiction, if it's the president that's supposed to faithfully execute the laws, how far does the law go? What does the law give the president the ability to do with regard to dangerous illegal aliens inside America's borders? Now, this is what you've been hearing a lot about over the last few weeks because someone on President Trump's staff brilliantly went back and found this 1798 Alien Enemies Act that's still on the books, hasn't been removed by Congress, still gives the president not just the authority or what's the word I'm looking for, not just the right to do this, not just the opportunity to do this. It gives the president the responsibility to do this, the duty to do this. In other words, a president that is not doing this is violating the Constitution because they're not faithfully executing the law that Congress passed and that at the time President John Adams signed and that is still on the books today. And it just makes sense, right? Let's just look at it from a common sense point of view. If bad people are in our country and they came across the border illegally, and when I say bad people, I'm talking rapists, murderers, gang members. I'm talking the worst of the worst. We're not even getting to just those who broke the law coming in illegally because they wanted a job or seeking asylum or whatever. That's a whole other subject. We'll get to those. But right now, we're talking about rapists, murderers, gang members, really bad dudes. We're talking about people you do not want in your neighborhood, and you do not want in your state, and we do not want in our country. So if those people are to be removed, and the President of the United States is not only not removing them, but inviting them in, facilitating their entry into the country, working with them to not just get them across the border, but allow them to go into the deepest parts of our country. That's treason. Joe Biden should be put on trial for treason for doing that. Mayorkas should be put on trial for treason for doing that. So that's one side of the coin. That's what we had a year ago. Now we have a president who not only is saying, I'm not going to be derelict in duty. I'm not going to refuse to execute the laws. I'm looking at Article 2 in the Constitution, and here's what I'm supposed to do as president. I'm going to faithfully execute the laws, and here's the law. And here's a responsibility of the president to get rid of bad people, get them out of our country. And I'm going to go do that. And so now he goes and does that, clearly within his jurisdiction. It's in black and white. It's right there in the statute. He is absolutely authorized to do this by Congress and the Constitution. And so now he goes out there and he starts doing this, and he's saving American lives. He's making our communities safer. He's doing what the previous president should have done. He's cleaning up the previous president's mess. And we have judges at the district court level that are going to suddenly jump out of Article 3 into Article 2 and say, oh, hey, guess what? I'm the executor now. I'm the one that's going to execute the laws. I'm the one that's going to decide who gets to leave the country, or who gets to be removed from the country, who gets to do the removing from the country. And even though the Alien Enemies Act specifically positively accepts this statute from judicial review, I'm going to do my judicial review anyway, and I'm not only going to just judicial review, I'm going to judicial activate. In other words, I'm going to be a judicial activist, and I'm going to make the decision for who is going to be removed from our country or not. That's what's happening right now, folks. Now, that's just one example. That's the most obvious, blatant, ugly example, and we're all watching that one unfold. But that's just one of many. I mean, there are dozens of district court decisions overriding the president's decision-making power when they are not the ones supposed to be deciding what the color of the truck is. They are crossing the neighbor line, going to the neighbor's house or neighbor's driveway, and changing what the neighbor has decided they want their house or their car to look like. They are absolutely violating their jurisdiction. And I realize you may be listening to this and going, yeah, but Rick, isn't the court there to protect us and to keep us from unconstitutional things happening and keep us from having a rogue government and aren't they supposed to save the day? No, they're not. It is extremely rare that the court should step in and say something's unconstitutional. And they should only do it when it's on its face unconstitutional, not when it's a policy debate and question of what should be done. Several of the founders had really good quotes on this where they talked about how the court is ill-suited, it is not equipped, I forget all the different language they used, to make policy decisions. They just aren't, judges aren't policymakers. They're literally supposed to say, you're the plaintiff, you're the defendant, here's the law that I'm reviewing, and I'm going to apply the law to this plaintiff and defendant that's in front of me. That's all they're supposed to do. The decision about the law itself and what it's going to be, that's up to Congress and the president. And so we have I do not like using this phrase. I don't know if I shouldn't even say constitutional crisis, because it's not a constitutional crisis from the standpoint of it's not clear what the Constitution says. Like, I would argue that when it comes to what do you do with multiple sets of electors, that's a constitutional crisis because the Constitution is not clear on what we should have done in 2020 dealing with those electors. This is not a constitutional crisis. It is clear that the president has the power to do this. So what do? Well, we're getting ready for a break here, and I'd love to hear from you. Maybe you've got some ideas for what President Trump should do in this situation. You've got a split Supreme Court. You've got the really great justices, Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito, agree with me. They're saying exactly what I'm saying right now. But then you got these sellouts and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Barrett and Roberts that have joined the three leftists to try to tell the president what to do. So what does the president do in this situation? I would suggest channeling Andrew Jackson and saying, nice opinion you got there. Now let me see you enforce it. I would suggest this is a moment, an inflection point, where the president should stand up to the court and say, that is not your job. That is not your authority. I am the one that's responsible for this, and I'm going to do my job. That's what I think he should do. We'll see what happens. Hey, stay with us. 888-589-8840 is the phone number. 888-589-8840. Quick break. You're listening to At the Core with Walker Wildmon and Rick Green.
For that man ought not to expect that he will receive anything from the Lord, being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. The Apostle James introduces us to the notion of a double-minded man as one who doubts whether God can grant the wisdom necessary to successfully navigate and overcome trials. The one who remains steadfast, unwavering in their confidence in God, in the face of adversity, is able to rejoice in the midst of trials because of the faith produced by intimate communion with God and full persuasion of his unyielding goodness. The unstable man is double-minded as to whether God remains trustworthy at all times and in all seasons.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner, or visit the podcast page at afr.net for more from Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
AFA Stream is your source for inspirational, informational, educational, and entertainment video content from American Family Association. You'll find documentaries like Culture Warrior, Don Wildman, and the Battle for Decency.
Television in those days would be considered extremely mild as to what's available today.
You can access educational curriculum like Body of Evidence.
And there the Lord says, the hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord hath made even both of them.
You'll find titles like Life is a Civil Right from the AFA Cultural Institute.
If you're Martin Luther King Jr.'s niece and you were tricked, my goodness, how many more were tricked?
Much of the content is free to everyone. Great commission partners can see even more. And content is being added, so your options are increasing. Visit stream.afa.net and see what you like. AFA Stream, streaming video from American Family Association.
And my father, your great-grandfather, fought in World War II.
Really?
He was a gunner on the big ship out in the Pacific Ocean.
Wow.
Your great-grandmother did her part, too.
Was she on a ship?
Oh, no. She stayed back home. She and a lot of her friends worked really hard in a factory because the men had gone off to war.
Ooh.
And they held scrap metal drives to help in the war effort. The folks back home were heroes, too.
Here at the American Family Association, we consider you the heroes back home. As you fulfill your responsibility of caring for your family day to day, your partnership with us is crucial as we fight the enemies of freedom in America. Thank you for your commitment to the American Family Association.
Grandpa, what's a scrap metal drive?
Let's get some cookies, and I'll tell you all about it.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio with your host, Rick Green.
Welcome back to At the Core with Walker Wildman and Rick Green. I'm Rick Green, America's Constitution Coach. Phone number is 888-589-8840. That's 888-589-8840. We're talking about these judges completely outside the bounds of their authority. And just from a common sense perspective, okay, I've already given you the one example of the president has the constitutional and statutory authority to remove dangerous illegal aliens from our country, and that's what he's been doing. And now you have these district judges saying you can't, and even a Supreme Court now that is pausing this protection of our country. So that's one example, completely absurd, that the court thinks it should make that policy decision. It should entirely be the president. But then you got this. Let me give you one more before we go to the phones, because this one too, it just from a common sense perspective, I don't even have to go to the history of the constitutional phrases or any of that kind of stuff. Just listen to this headline. Trump administration asks the Supreme Court to allow prohibition on troops with gender dysphoria. Okay, let that sink in for a second. Let's break that down. The President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, the person that is constitutionally and statutorily given the responsibility to oversee our military, to appoint the people and to make the final decisions on how to protect this nation, on how to have a ready military. The commander-in-chief. Now listen, I get it. Congress absolutely has shared authority here to make all kinds of policies. Article 1, Section 8 is full of clauses of how the Congress can call up the state militias and all this stuff, right? There's a lot of congressional power here, absolutely. But then there is delegated power and obvious constitutional power for the president to be the one over the executive branch and over the military to maintain the readiness of our military. And that person, the person that's responsible for that, is having to go on bended knee and beg of his overlords, the U.S. Supreme Court, to allow him to implement a policy that says if you have a mental illness, you shouldn't be serving in the United States military. Can we just think about this for a second? Why should the President of the United States, I know when the pitch goes up in my voice, you know I'm about to lose it. Why should the President of the United States have to go beg a bunch of people who've never served in the military, who have no clue how to run the military, who have no responsibility on the policy of the military or what makes a good fighting unit? Why should the President of the United States, after consulting with his military generals and leaders and the Secretary of Defense and all these others, have to go on bended knee and beg of these 9 unelected, unaccountable lawyers in Washington, D.C. to allow him to implement a policy that makes perfect common sense to anyone with a brain that has not been brainwashed by this absolute crazy transgender agenda, to have to go beg of these 9 justices to simply say, hey, you know what? If you're a dude and you think you're a girl, you're probably not fit for being in the barracks of our military or being in a combat situation with bullets flying over your head. You probably don't have the mental toughness to be able to handle that. If you're a lady that thinks you've got extra body parts that you don't have, you're probably not mentally fit to be flying the helicopter or in any other form or fashion in a combat zone. I mean, I know you that are listening to me right now, I know I think I've got enough common sense to know that's probably good military policy to not have those folks in the military. In fact, just so happens that was the military policy for the entire history of our country up until 15 seconds ago. And Donald Trump, when he first came in office, had enough common sense to say, that's crazy. We're not going to do that. And, of course, Joe Biden reversed that policy. Now, who should make this decision? The president with the SecDef, with the chiefs, Joint Chiefs of Staff? The president of the United States at the end of the day should be making that decision after the advice that they receive, not, I mean, I'm sorry, Amy Coney Barrett is not qualified to make this decision. Ketanji Brown Jackson is not qualified to make this decision. And yes, my favorite judge, probably the best judge in the history of the United States, Clarence Thomas, is not qualified to make this decision. None of them are. They're not there. They're not out there in the, working with the troops and training the troops and working on the policy. It is insanity to think that the President of the United States has got to go beg of the United States Supreme Court to be able to implement a policy that says if you've got a mental illness, you cannot serve in the United States military. And for those of you that might be saying, oh, it's not a mental illness. It is. It has been. For all of human history, it's been a mental illness until 15 seconds ago when we lost all common sense in this country and literally went into a Romans 1 situation where we lost our minds. But we're coming back. We're coming back. We're getting our common sense back. People are thinking again. They're actually adding 1 + 1 and saying that's 2. And 2 + 2 actually equals 4. So we're getting our common sense back. But these crazies, these attorneys that are arguing right now that the president should not be able to do this. Listen to this. I'm just going to read this one line to you. So he's this attorney that's arguing on behalf of these folks with a mental illness, men that think they're women and women that think they're men. Actually, I'm sorry. This is what the judge said. The U.S. district judge. Again, these lowest level of the federal judiciary judges who are over a very small area making policy for the entire country. This U.S. District Judge Benjamin Settle, whoever that is, said all transgender service members are likely to suffer the irreparable harm of losing the military service career they have chosen, while otherwise qualified accession plaintiffs will lose the opportunity to serve. Can somebody please show me the constitutional phrase? Maybe somebody could call in with this. Could you point out which article, which clause is the transgender right to serve in the military clause? I seem to. I've got my pocket principles here. I'm kind of scanning through. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here about the military. I don't remember seeing that. I don't remember seeing if you have a mental illness, or you can even call it nice things like gender dysphoria, which is a mental illness. You have a constitutional right to serve in the military. That's nuts. That's absolute nuts. That's insanity. And we're arguing that. We got a United States federal district judge making that argument, and now arguing before the Supreme Court that they have a constitutional right to serve in the military. I don't have a constitutional right to serve in the military. Hey, when 9/11 happened and I went and put in my application, I was already an old dude at 30. What was I at that point? 30 years old. And they said, you're kind of old, but we'll give it a shot. And did my hearing test, and like a dummy when I was younger and go deer hunting, I'd, not wear ear protection. So, you shoot a 30-06 enough times close to your ear, you're going to have hearing problems. Well, I do. So they said, sorry, I don't have a constitutional right to say, hey, you have to let me serve, even though I've got that hearing problem. And in this particular combat situation, it's going to prevent me from being able to hear what I need to be hearing to fight well. I don't have a constitutional right to that. You don't have a constitutional right to serve in the military. This is just, it's beyond the pale, folks. So that's just two examples. I forget, there's dozens of district judges trying to stop the President of the United States from doing his job. And I just think we're at this point where, first of all, you and me, we need to know what the Constitution says. We need to know what the power of the presidency is, what the power of the court is, what the power of the legislature is, and what the power of the states are, what the power of the individual is, what the power of the local government. You see what I'm saying? There's all these different areas of jurisdiction, and we need to know where those lines are. So if you haven't taken biblical citizenship in modern America, you need to get into that course. You need to study how the Constitution works in America. First of all, as a Christian, you ought to know what the Bible says about how to treat your neighbor, how to form a society, how to govern biblically. And to know that, you got to study it. And so come do biblical citizenship, and you'll know what the Bible says about how government should work and what your role is as a citizen biblically, but then also constitutionally. How do you do this in the United States constitutional republic? In our particular form of government, how do you live out your biblical duty to be a good disciple of Christ in every area of your life? You have to know both in order to do that effectively. You have to know the biblical view, and you have to know the constitutional process for how to do this. So if you want to know what the proper role of each of these levels of government are and the individual and all that, you got to take biblical citizenship in modern America. PatriotAcademy.com to do that. Okay, you know what? I need to go to the phones because otherwise the temperature in the studio here is going to get so high that the sprinklers are going to go off or something. So I gotta find a topic here with the callers to try to calm down. Folks, I'm a justice lover. I'm telling you, I am a lover of justice. I think that's biblical. We're supposed to do that. We're supposed to do justice. I love the Constitution. I love the rule of law. I think you have liberty, as the song America the Beautiful says, liberty in law. As my mentor Zig Ziglar said, God's best blessings are found within his boundaries. When you don't have those boundaries, you lose the blessings because you move into chaos, which leads you to tyranny. So I do not like seeing our system of government turned into a pretzel and the empowerment of judges who are tyrants in their black robes making law without the authority to do so. I get hot under the collar about these things because I'm passionate about upholding the rule of law and restoring the Constitution. Okay, let's go to the phones. We're lit up all over the place here. We're going to start, I think Ron was first in Tennessee, so heading over to the volunteer state first. Ron, you're up. Go for it, man.
Good afternoon, sir. Just 4 quick housekeeping points I'd like to make, and I'll let you comment. The first thing is there's...
I feel like I need to take notes. If you got 4 of them, man, I got to take notes. Go ahead, man. I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Just quick points. I mean, number one, all of the back channel traffic direction from the third Obama presidency, okay, we can sniff that through the NSA records. Every IP point, every access point, every email and phone call that's transconducted through the NSA, I really hope that the Musk brothers were able, as network engineers, to copy that and forward it to the proper authority.
Your point being, though, Ron, let me just make sure I understand your point. Your point being, everybody knows Joe Biden wasn't making decisions. He didn't have the mental faculties to do so. That the Obamas were still pulling strings behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's Rice and her Tehran buddies and Obama, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
from
Okay.
what my research
Point
is.
one well taken. What's
Thing.
point two?
Point two is a military tribunal with a three-panel judge can decide an issue of insurrection or sedition or treason in about an hour and a half. You can't tie it. It's a three-panel judge. Why is Hillary Clinton and her gang and her network of thieves still out of Leavenworth prison? Yeah. I don't understand this.
No, you know what, NSA, Ron? I just had a conversation last night with some good friends over dinner about the fact that, all this, saber rattling is not enough. We need to see some actual trials and some actual convictions and some people going to jail and potentially even for treason put to death. If we don't see those kind of things happen where you actually have justice, then we're going to end up right back in the mess that we were in. Go ahead. Point two is good. Point three.
The point three. Okay. Point three is we don't have time to dither between technocrats and the banksters to say, oh, well, the Federal Reserve, we saw our president back down the next day after threatening Jerome Powell. And this is deeply disturbing. That Jerome Powell and his bankster buddies, who we don't even know because the Federal Reserve isn't even federal at all, it's European banksters that are holding our dollar seigniorage for the printing of the money. They get a 6% right off the top, and then we have to pay that, and then we have to pay the interest. We're getting screwed here. Why is that still enabled? And I understand it takes time, but there's not time. The clock is ticking on the national debt, okay?
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, point three is get rid of the Fed, I think, if I understood you right.
Well, there's not time.
Or at least rein them in.
Our dollar is about to collapse, and okay. I see the Trump team
Give me point four, because I got a ton of other callers. I can't give you the whole show. I appreciate you, man. I like it, though. 4 points. Go ahead. Point number four.
Point number four is every man, woman, and child should be on their knees praying that this country doesn't collapse.
Yes. Amen to that. All right, Ron, good stuff, man. Thanks for calling in. And yeah, just to put an exclamation point on Ron's last point. Look, we can do all the political stuff we want. My pastor says it every Sunday, and he's right every time. We don't have a political problem. We have a spiritual problem. The political symptoms and the sickness that we've got in this country is downstream from the spiritual problem. And so the prayer part is absolutely essential. The National Day of Prayer coming up. I hope everybody's going to participate in a National Day of Prayer close to them. Incredibly important. And it takes both. John Hancock, I urge you by all that's dear, by all that's sacred, by all that's honorable, not only to pray, but to act. So we got to do both. But I think if you leave out one or the other, it doesn't work. It's certainly not going to last for sure. So, yeah, good points. All right, Ron, good stuff. Let's go to Mississippi. Lee is up. Lee in Mississippi. Go for it.
Yeah. How you doing? I just want to tell you that I think you're spot on with everything you said. And those judges need to mind their own business, and Trump just needs to go and do what he does, because those judges, they don't have a dog in this fight. They need to let that man go to work and do the cleanup he needs to do.
I like that. Go to work, do the cleanup, get the work done. And look, we're not saying that a president should just ignore every court decision or every court opinion. It should weigh. It should have a place in this, and there's absolutely clear constitutional violations that if the president does that and the court says you're violating the Constitution, here's what it clearly says, or that's you've made up a law on your own without Congress, that executive order is unconstitutional. I mean, obviously, we want a president or a court to do pushback on that kind of thing, and the president to have to respond to that. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the courts doing things they should not be doing. So who tells them no? That's essentially where we're at. They have become this unaccountable fiefdom where they get to do whatever they want, and nobody gets to push back on them. Listen, if you've taken our Constitution classes, you know that I call it we don't live under a Constitution right now. We live under a courtstitution, and that's got to stop. It's got to stop. We've got to put the judges back in their proper place, and therefore there should be pushback against them. And I think the president has to be careful. He has to be wise. He has to be discerning about this. Pick the right fights. I think clearly if you're deporting rapists, murderers, and gang members and the court tells you can't, that's the right fight. That's the one where you say, thanks but no thanks. The plane has already left the airspace of America, and just like he did with that first plane load, but I'll start sending more. Anyway, we got to take a quick break. I'm Rick Green, America's Constitution Coach. You're listening to At the Core with Walker Wildmon and Rick Green.
The American Family Association's mission is to inform, equip, and activate individuals to strengthen the moral foundations of our culture. We also support the church. Our goal is to be a leading organization in biblical worldview training for cultural transformation. AFA aims to evangelize the lost and disciple the believer. We aim to strengthen biblical marriages and equip parents to raise godly children.
Thank you for standing with the American Family Association.
I am thoroughly looking forward to our Weekend with AFA coming up in October, where we're going to be able to meet our supporters like yourself, to fellowship, to visit our facilities here in Tupelo, and to have everyone come together for a wonderful weekend.
It's a Weekend with AFA, Thursday, October 2nd through Saturday, October 4th in Tupelo, Mississippi. Speakers will include Abraham Hamilton III, Jenna Ellis, Tim Barton, Tim Wildmon, and more. Register at afa.net/weekend. In the darkest corners of the world, hunger, abuse, lack of clean water, and shelter are everyday realities. Tomorrow Clubs is a ministry motivated by the Great Commission to bring God's love and the hope of the gospel to these forsaken places. Here's an update from a team leader.
One of the greatest impacts Tomorrow Clubs have had is in raising a whole generation of Christ followers. More than 500,000 children have learned to follow Jesus in their Tomorrow Club, and tens of thousands have gone on to become leaders in their churches and communities. A great many of the leaders serving at Tomorrow Clubs today came to faith in a Tomorrow Club, and this new generation of Christ followers has brought revival to dying churches and transformation to communities.
Tomorrow Clubs provide Christ-centered discipleship for children and teens in underserved countries. To learn more about how you can partner with Tomorrow Clubs to reach the world for Christ, visit tomorrowclubs.org. That's tomorrowclubs.org. All gifts are tax deductible.
Your Caregiver Minute with Peter Rosenberger. I'm going to give you a quote from Churchill. You know I love Churchill, and I'm a big fan of his. It is better to do something than to do nothing while waiting to do everything. The problems we live with as a caregiver are often so overpowering that it paralyzes us. We just wait till things are better, optimal, and then we'll try to tackle all these things. And that's what Churchill is getting at. Let's do something today, right now, today. How can I get healthier today? Not next week, not next Thursday, not a 7-step plan to getting healthier. What can I do right now that's healthy? You could put down a soda right now and pick up water. You could drink black coffee instead of cream and sugar. You can say no to a donut and say yes to something that's healthier for you. Healthy caregivers make better caregivers.
Hope for the Caregiver with Peter Rosenberger. Saturday mornings at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on American Family Radio.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio with your host, Rick Green.
We're back here on At the Core with Walker Wildmon and Rick Green. I'm Rick Green, America's Constitution Coach. Thanks for staying with me today, talking about these out-of-control judges and what the president should do in response to this. And I was just coming across article. Let's see. This is Robert Romano, Executive Director of Americans for Limited Government. Good folks over there. I love being on their email list. They send out a lot of great stuff. But I think he's absolutely right in this article that he wrote. Here's the headline. Congress should expand scope of expedited removals to include mass deportation that the majority supports. What he's arguing is, so we've got the presidential authority under this Alien Enemies Act from 1798. We've also got presidential authority, to remove aliens under, there was a 1996 law about this. I mean, everybody forgets that, Obama removed a couple of million as well, and the Clintons and others. So Democrats and Republicans alike have removed a lot of illegal aliens. Anyway, his argument is under these different statutory laws, and Justice Alito talks about this in some of these decisions, that what would be a quick fix, because right now, let me back up. If President Trump is not using the Alien Enemies Act, where he doesn't have to take them through court. If he can't make the argument under that, then he's got to go under this 1996 law. Let's see, what was it called? Make sure I get this right. The Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. If he does that, then they've got to have these trials, okay? And so that's what President Trump was arguing over the last few days, is saying, if I have to do a trial for every single one of these illegal aliens, it's going to take 133 years to remove 20 million illegal aliens that need to be deported. So it's obviously absurd. And so what Congress should do, what this guy's arguing, I think is great. I'm gonna study this a little bit more and maybe start talking about this around the country. But what he's arguing is that Congress should amend and make it clear that the president doesn't have to go through trials on this, that these are expedited removals, that these people do not have Fifth Amendment constitutional rights, and that he has the right, because they get to establish the uniform rule of naturalization under Article 1, Section 8, that's what I was talking about at the top of the program, then they can empower the president to remove them without a trial. If you came into our country illegally, why should you get a trial on whether or not we remove you? And by the way, I'm greatly bothered by the fact that we have a Supreme Court that is coming to the aid of these illegal aliens and requiring due process for them, while they ignored due process for these J6 defendants that sat in solitary confinement for years, that sat in jail for 4 years, some of them. It's greatly offensive to my sensibilities as a patriot and an American and a constitutionalist that they would care more about defending illegal aliens who came into our country breaking the law than they would care about defending the very people that were trying to defend the Constitution and demand that the Congress follow the Constitution. That should offend anyone that loves their country and make you question whether or not these people on the U.S. Supreme Court should be making these kind of decisions instead of the President of the United States. Okay, I'm going to calm down. Okay, let's go back to the phones. We got one from, let's see, Texas. Ron in Texas. Hook 'em horns. Go for it, man.
Hey, hi, Rick. Hey, Rick,
yes, sir.
These local judges and justices are disrespecting the will of the people.
Amen.
If I were President Trump, I will disrespect them too, ignore them, and proceed with all the deportation and deal with all this lawfare later.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's what I'm arguing. Now I am arguing that he's got to be careful. He's got to be smart. He's got to be strategic. You got to pick which decisions to ignore. Can't just blanket say, "Hey, I'm the president. I get to do whatever I want." I don't think he would do that. I thought he would do that in his first term. Okay, I'll be honest. I thought it's part of the reason I didn't support Trump in the early part of the 2016 primary. I was Ted Cruz guy. I thought, man, this Trump guy's just going to be Obama for the right. In other words, he's just going to go make law on his own. He's going to ignore Congress. He's a business guy. He knows how to get things done. I mean, if you can build skyscrapers in New York, you know how to get things done. And he's just going to get frustrated with the system and say, I'm going to do this on my own. So I thought he would do it in his first term, and he didn't. He followed the Constitution. His executive orders turned out to be constitutional. He was careful. And even now, with how aggressive he's being, he's also being constitutional. That's why I have to pinch myself every day and say, man, it's Christmas every day, because 4 or 5 times a day something great comes out of this White House, and they're actually following the Constitution. So he's being aggressive, he's getting things done, and he's following the Constitution. I didn't think that could be done by this guy. He's doing it in spades. Okay, so back to your comment on the call. He should ignore some of these decisions, but not all of them. I guess I'm just saying he's got to thread the needle and be wise about how he does this. And Congress has got to have his back. If Congress will do what this Romano is suggesting and add more authority for the deportations without trials, these are illegals. Let's not forget, they came into our country illegally. We ought to be able to remove them without a trial. But they need to do that statutorily, and it not just be the rapists, murderers, and gang members and the ones that are so easy to prove that they're dangerous to the country. It ought to be anybody that's here illegally. And that way you get them all out and then start fresh, and we welcome. What we ought to do is deport all 20 million of them and then have a fast-track process for good people coming back into the country and say, we want you. We want legal immigration. We want people here, but you got to come and do it the right way. Okay, I'm getting off track here. Let's go back to the phones. We'll just stick in Texas for a second. Karen in Texas is up next. Go ahead.
Well, I think you've sort of answered my questions, but I was still concerned about the Garcia case. Why are the liberals picking him? They say that he has not had due process or a court trial. So how can legally Trump still deport him?
Yeah, great question, Karen. And listen, this could get into a sticky argument of, okay, when does a person have constitutional rights, right? If you're a citizen, you obviously have constitutional rights. If you're visiting the United States, how far do we go with the Bill of Rights and your due process and that sort of thing? And then if you're here illegally, how far do we go? And this is a big debate, even to the point of terrorist, right? We've had big debates over what's the definition of torture and how do you treat non-combatants, and all of this stuff comes back to that question of who gets constitutional rights and who doesn't. And so we could definitely argue that all day long, and there's definitely some gray areas and some muddy water. The extreme ends of that argument, very easy to say, hey, you're an American citizen? Absolutely, you have constitutional rights. If you're here illegally, if you cross the border illegally and came into our country, I would argue you don't have constitutional rights. We can deport you without any due process whatsoever. That should be obvious, but it's not, clearly, because we have a Supreme Court now that's actually pausing and saying, that even in some of these situations where someone came here illegally, we know they came here illegally, they admit they came here illegally, that we're going to give them all kinds of due process. Now, those are the extremes. Now, I would argue, Karen, that there is, if someone is seeking asylum, and they come here and they get asylum, that they could get caught up in a dragnet that just grabs everybody and deports them, and that, we would like to have a process for trying to prevent that, and so having some sort of due process for that person that was granted asylum properly, so that they don't get caught up in a dragnet and sent off to wherever. I get that. From a best-case scenario, that sounds wonderful. But I also think life's messy, making law is messy, and justice is sometimes messy. And there's going to be abuses of the system. And at this point, because of Joe Biden and because of Mayorkas allowing for this absolute invasion of 20 million plus coming into the country illegally, unfortunately, because of that, it's going to be really hard to prevent the dragnet from catching some good people and that were here seeking asylum. And probably you're going to end up with some citizens that get caught up in that dragnet and get deported. And it may take years to get those people back. I'm sorry. There's no perfect system. That is better than having a system where, we let the muck up the works to the point that it takes 133 years to deport, which obviously would not, it's insane. So the other end of the extreme doesn't work either. And it's unfortunate, but let's not forget who got us in this mess. The globalists got us in this mess. The people that decided we're going to open America's borders and just let anybody and everybody come in here because we want to dilute the American value system and the American citizens' patriotism. We want to dilute patriotism in America so that America no longer is the most powerful, most free, wealthiest, most benevolent nation on the planet. That's what got us in this mess, was these people that wanted to dilute both our values and our patriotism and our voting population, make it easier to cheat, all of the things that they've done, also distort the representation in Congress, which right now is a problem because you've got 15 to 30 seats that Democrats hold right now because of illegal aliens being counted that should be Republican seats. So they've managed to really mess up the system. And it's not going to be squeaky clean perfect to fix it. It's going to be messy. Your people are going to get caught up in it. It's sort of like the casualties of innocent casualties of war. That's going to happen. There's going to be some of that. I wish I had a better answer, but to Karen's point, I think with this, supposed Maryland father, he's not a Maryland father. He's an illegal alien that took up, residence in Maryland, and apparently was a wife beater and did all these other things. And so in that case, I think no constitutional rights. He came here illegally, send him home. Okay, and the idea, by the way, Karen, you raise a great point that you might have been getting to that I missed. The idea that the Democrats would champion this guy, I mean, throw me in that briar patch, folks. I hope the Democrats keep making their poster child the gang members and the rapists and the murderers and the other criminals that Donald Trump's trying to get rid of and send back to their home countries or anywhere else other than the United States. I hope the Democrats just keep blindly championing the cause of MS-13 gang members because they are losing votes every day. And I don't think they're temporarily losing those votes. I think they have awakened a ton of people in the middle and that called themselves Democrats for the last, maybe their whole life, that are now saying, you know what, I can't, it's gone too far. This transgender thing, guys and girls sports and in showers and bathrooms, the championing of rapists, murderers, and gang members, I'm done. I'm just done. There are millions of American Democrats that are saying, I'm done. I'm moving on. This is why you got Bill Maher and James Carville and all these other Democrats out there that are saying, guys, we got to stop this. They're trying to shake up, shake their own party out of its insanity in order to try to save it. And the longer it goes on, the harder it's going to be for them to be able to get back. Okay, let's see if we can knock out a couple more phone calls before we run out of time today. Michael in Virginia. Michael, you're up next, man. Make it quick, but go for it.
Hi, Enrique. Yeah, thank you. You are doing a great job and touched on a number of points. I had 3 points. I'll be real quick.
Sure, go for it.
First one is that God Almighty is a God of justice.
Amen.
And he's not the author of chaos and the lawlessness we are experiencing from our courts. What I would like to suggest is the president should exercise his authority over the rogue judges and do what is right, as you have mentioned. Now, my reference, I gave you a screener there with a high percentage of Christians who know the Bible. I want to quickly, with the authority, quote Jude chapter 1. It's only one chapter, verse 6. If it's okay, can I read real quick?
Go for it. You got about 60 seconds though, and we got a hard stop at the end of the show. Go for it.
Okay. It says, and I remind you of the angels who did not stay with the limits of authority, and God gave them, but left their praise where they belonged. And God has kept them securely chained in prisons of darkness, waiting for the great day of judgment. I'll leave that at that. But as I believe the last thing is we need to give the president more muscle support from Congress, and as citizens, we take the citizens' class. Thank you, sir.
Hey, thank you very much, Michael. Thanks for calling in. I think that's a great way to close out the program today, because it is. When we say law and order, when I was talking earlier about loving justice and wanting rule of law and liberty in law and blind equal justice, I didn't talk about that part, but that's what I meant. This is a biblical idea. This is a God idea. This is not Jefferson's idea. This is not Madison's idea or John Locke's or Blackstone or Montesquieu or any of that. This is a God idea. This is the laws of nature and nature's God. God designed us to love justice and to want to have this situation where in our neighborhoods everybody's treated the same under the law, and that a perversion of justice, when that justice is perverted, that there would be consequences for that, and that we would turn around and correct that. So when you prosecute your political opponents, you pervert justice so that you only apply the law or you misapply the law to the people you hate, and then you give the people that are your friends a pass when they violate. That's a perversion of justice. That when that happens, that we would have something in us that wells up and says, that's wrong. Man, I don't want that to happen in my country. I'm willing to stand up against that. And so that's why you've had all these people come out of the woodwork and go testify at school boards and go protest and get involved where they never got involved before. Because of the perversion of justice in our country, it has awakened something in the church. And if we seize this moment, if we take advantage of this window of opportunity, then I believe we can restore justice in this land. We can rebuild liberty in this land for generations to come, should the Lord tarry. And when no man knows the day. So, folks, we have to build like that. So let's rebuild liberty in this country. Let's restore justice in this country. Let's do our part. Every day you need to be listening to At the Core with Walker Wildmon and Rick Green, and we're going to help you do that. We're going to give you a lot of action items on how to do that. We're going to have guests talking about how to do that. Thank you so much for listening today. I appreciate you listening to my rants today. Go out there and do your part to restore justice and rebuild liberty. You've been listening to At the Core with Walker Wildmon and Rick Green.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast, may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Abraham Hamilton III.
If you really